Welcome to the Revenue Blueprint. This is not another sales podcast on tips and tactics. Instead, we focus on unfiltered stories from founders and early stage sales leaders on what it takes to build a successful revenue team. If you get just a little bit of value from this, we ask that you pay it forward by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. All right, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Revenue Blueprint. Seth and I are the Black Jacket Squad today. For those that you are watching, it is fall here in the Northeast. Also, before we were hopped on this, we were talking, and all of a sudden, some balloons popped up on my screen, and it turns out this is like a new Apple thing, and they've got all sorts of gestures that you can basically use on any video app. So if I hold my two fingers up, look, peace sign, I'm getting
what? Revenue Blueprint PSA, public service announcement, letting everybody know what's going on.
We've got 2 thumbs down. We'll give you rain showers over the video. 2 thumbs up should be fireworks, I think.
Oh,
so like this stuff is.
You mean rock and roll? Yeah, rock and roll is a cool one.
It's pretty cool.
I'm just gonna do that the whole time.
But it can be distracting if you don't realize it's going on, and I haven't figured out how to turn it off yet. So. Just a PSA for anyone that's out there.
Let it rip.
Yeah, it happened to be during a client call, and I was very confused. But anyways, so Seth, we're talking. I know you've had some conversations coming up about strategy and how to coach and teach on strategy. So why don't you walk us through what types of conversations you've been having?
Yeah, I feel that it's a breakthrough. Hopefully it's valuable to everyone listening. The founders often build teams with a lot of potential. Usually that potential is more junior folks that haven't gained a lot of wisdom and maybe have challenges making strategic decisions, haven't thought through how to make strategic decisions. So I've gotten this question a bunch of times from a number of different founders over the years, and I never really had a good answer until recently. Hopefully this is a good answer. But I've seen it work. So we're starting to do this, and it seems to be working. And if anybody else have any ideas, you can contact us.
And this is specifically like how to coach people to be better at strategy, or even coaching founders how to be better at strategy?
I guess it could be used for anyone. In the instance I've been asked about and thinking about, it's usually good strategic decision makers, i.e. founders, needing to and wanting to rely on more junior folks to make decisions. Let's say in the recent example was a VP of sales. He's promoted some AEs into middle managers, and they need to make some decisions and think strategically about stuff. And the question was how to get them to think strategically, which is like, sounds easy, but when you start to unpack like how to teach people to think strategically, it gets really complicated. All right, we'll see how many times we can say strategic.
Let me ask you one question on that. Like, I guess two questions. Why do they need him to think more strategically, and what is an example of him thinking more strategically?
And I guess we get into the definition of strategically, but I think it's like taking into all factors in the bigger picture when making a decision that affects a team, for example, right? That's what I think good leaders are doing, which is like, yes, this would be better for the team, but this is better for the company. How do we kind of bridge this gap? And how do we make a decision that is, equitable for all parties, knowing that if the business doesn't survive and we don't put the business first, we don't have employees. So we got to really, put that first. And I think the need of more strategic thinking was, again, what is a strategic decision versus what is not? It's like you want people making good decisions in all situations, right? And I guess strategic would mean more things taken into account, bigger picture, more context, all of these pieces. And I think if you have a bottleneck of leadership making all of the decisions, it disempowers middle managers or people rising up in leadership, does not prepare them for leadership, and puts a lot of weight and responsibility on 1 or 2 people to make all the decisions. So there's some more context to it. So the framework we've been using is, it's kind of hiding in plain sight, because this is something that I used to do, but it wasn't specifically to train strategy, but it was to help people grow in their roles, was to give them a problem that we needed to solve, a decision that needed to be made that you could think of being strategic, right? Maybe aligning goals for a team with business goals and kind of bridging that gap. That's one that commercial folks have to deal with all the time. And what I would do is I would think it through and come to my own conclusion, right? Then I would present the same challenge or problem to the person or group of people to come to their own conclusion. So I knew what I was probably going to do anyway. So there was little risk in giving them the opportunity to think this through. And it gave them a chance to think through a strategic decision, make a decision, and then share it with me. And then I would ask how they came to this conclusion. And so it gives me a chance to understand how they're starting to think about things and what their decision would be. If just like had no training wheels on, it's just like, what would it be? And then I can tell them what my decision is or was, and maybe I take into account, maybe they came up with a better idea. Maybe their decision-making was more strategic than mine, and great, right? We all want sparring partners. And then I would tell them how I came to my decision. So it gave them kind of the feedback loop of going through this process. And you could, as they get better at making these decisions, you could give them more and more complex strategic stuff, and you start to give them full autonomy to make some lower level decisions, like changing a specific team's goal for a month or something minor. I would stop short of maybe a comp plan, because that gets a little bit more complicated, but starting to empower folks to do that. And I think you even mentioned, or came to my brain as we're going through this, is having a sparring partners, right? You need sparring partners to sharpen your ideas. And so if you can grow your team to be sparring partners because they can think strategically, I've always had sparring partners on my teams, and they're usually people that have more wisdom, that have had to make decisions and kind of learn through mistakes. It just empowers me to make better decisions because I can have someone to think it through together. What are your thoughts on this? Where could this go wrong? What's your initial impression?
When I think about how to coach people how to think more strategically, I think back to some exercises that we did at my last company where the CEO was an ex-Bridgewater guy, thought in frameworks all the time, and that really helped me build some of my own strategic muscle. And there was some exercises we went and did to help train each other and our employees on thinking strategically. I think the concept that you're sharing about giving them basically practice exercises with no risk makes lots of sense. Where I think this goes wrong is if that's not very clearly communicated to them, the scenario that you're in, right? Before you do that, you need to let them know, hey, I want to help level up your strategic thinking as you are continue to grow in this company. And so in order to do that, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to talk about some fundamentals that go into some of these larger decision frameworks. And then two, I'm going to start giving you some of these strategic exercises that I'm already thinking about myself, and have you kind of do those as dry runs or practice runs. And then we'll compare our proposals together and talk through the logic on how we got there. If you don't tell them that you're doing that and you just say, hey, I want to get your thoughts on this project. Here's the end goal, go do it. And they come back to you and realize that you already had a decision made, or that you've been thinking about this in depth a bunch already. It's going to be incredibly demotivating for them. They're going to feel like they just wasted a bunch of their time. So I think the other parts, the surrounding stuff around that is important. And I'm not saying that you weren't going to do that, or that's not what you're suggesting, but I think
I tried to undermine them just to reinforce my power.
Right, exactly. No, of course you're going to be wrong. I did that just to prove that you were wrong and I'm smarter than you.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, just as saying we want to, a lot of people say, I want to up-level my strategic. A lot of sales reps are I want to work on more strategy. And it's well, every sales rep wants to just do strategy. And even on this call, we're just, this conversation, figuring out what is strategy even mean? What is the definition of it? Everybody wants to do it. It sounds like not doing a lot of work, just pondering philosophical topics. But there's so many things that come up that are strategic, that decisions need to be made. You don't need to go hunting for them. They're going to continue to come in daily and weekly, that it's here, you want to work on strategy? This is a decision we're going to need to make. Think it through. I'll think it through too. you'll share with me your findings and how you got there. I'll share you my findings and how I got to my decision, and then we'll decide.
Yeah, I think tactically speaking, from a training standpoint, it starts with helping them understand trade-offs, right? Like everything we do in life is about trade-offs, and understanding, like going through some exercise where they have to talk through the trade-offs of choosing one path versus the other. And I know McKinsey called these like issue trees, where you have your issue and it's like, okay, if we go down this path, here's what could possibly happen. And then that branches off to, okay, then we have a decision to make here. What could happen if we make either of these decisions? What could happen if we make either of these decisions? And you do that exhaustively. And that is like a really good, like detailed approach to going through an exercise like that. So then you can then look at all your options at the end of the issue tree and say, okay, this is the one that I think is going to be best for the company or best for the team, whatever you're trying to make, right? So that like that issue tree concept is something that I really love.
It's shocking that McKinsey's thought about this before.
It's they've got that. They've got like the MECE framework, right? The mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive thing, where it's like you have to make sure that everything can fit into its own box, which rarely ever works, but it's like a good exercise to just like get your mind to think that way. And so I think there's when you're trying to do like train on this type of thinking, issue trees are like my favorite exercise to go through. Just have them write that stuff out, or do it on whiteboard, whatever it is. And then I think the other piece that people miss a lot is like when you're doing something strategic in a company, it often requires lots of communication and very careful communication. And it is remarkable how many people I speak with that are at venture-backed companies or big companies that have apparently lots of smart people there that are garbage at communicating change. And I just think that's the piece that gets overlooked the most when it comes to making strategic decisions. And I'm sure we've both been there when change has been made and we're like, how could you have screwed this up so bad from a communication standpoint?
Okay, so while we're on this same topic from a communication standpoint, a piece that's adjacent to the strategy or coming to a conclusion, when I used to have to make decisions that would affect a whole team, what I would do is I'd bring in someone who was the most strategic thinker, maybe someone who's a little bit more experienced and understand about these changes and could add some insights. And I'd start with, I'd already thought through the problem and probably what I was going to do. So I'd have some path to it, but not a final conclusion. And I'd ask them, I say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts? You know, maybe even this is what I'm thinking. Where could it go wrong? What would you change about this? And get them kind of involved in the decision itself and having feedback, because I need that guidance. And also they're a member of the team that's going to be affected by it. So they're already going to be, they'll be the best to give me like, yeah, if you did this, this is how I'd feel. And then I would slowly go through the whole team in order of kind of people that can handle this stuff and kind of keep it quiet maybe and appreciate it, down to the people who don't have a lot of experience or context or care about the decision. And then I would calibrate the decision or the strategic thinking as I went through each person to get through to a final decision. And by then it's basically been socialized with everybody and been vetted by all the people. And then when I rolled it out in a room, you saw people turning around and looking at each other like, I'm in the know on this. Like, I helped shape this. And everybody in the room is already nodding because they already know what I'm going to say. And they've all helped shape in it. So they bought in even more. And so for me, rolling out those things, it solves the two things. The communication, they already know what I'm going to say before I say it because they help shape it, right? And two, everyone's already bought in because like it's over communicated. They understand where we are in the process.
This kind of communication waterfall method, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Communication waterfall.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone's ever said that before,
yeah,
but I like
no,
thinking about it that way.
Communication waterfall.
Right, but basically what you're trying to do, I think, whenever you're rolling out changes or you're making some strategic move, you don't want people to be surprised unless they absolutely have to be, in terms of, like, that's usually like a layoff or an acquisition where you have to be buttoned up as much as possible. So you don't want people to be surprised, and you want people to be bought in, right, when you're making big moves. And so this is a great way to get that consensus where you start with the core 2-3 people that need to be involved in making this decision. They start building it out. They build it out 30-40%. They start to get feedback from a couple other people that should also be bought in on the decision. You get it to 60, 70, 80%, and you include a few more people and say, hey, here's the direction we're thinking. Here's what we thought through so far. Do you have any thoughts or comments or anything like that? And then by the time, like you said, it comes for the rollout, most people in the room already knew this was coming. They already have some idea of what it was going to be, and they're not like totally surprised by it at all. And it's because when you think about like the ANSI goals, like how this could go wrong, it's when you roll something out and people are like, what the fuck? Like you're hitting us blindsided this. Like, how come we didn't have any input on this? How come we didn't have any say? How come no one asked for our opinions? That's when people get pissed off. That's when they leave company. That's when they leave you shitty Glassdoor reviews.
Yeah. And the irony is that, man, it's like my mind is going now with all these different instances that it happens. But if you put the people who would reject this decision the most in the position to make the decision, they would likely realize that the decision you're making is the best decision. So if you blindside them with it, they're like immediately rejecting it like it's bad, versus if they're asked about it before it happens, they can come to the conclusion of like, it's, even if you don't take their feedback, like, oh, this is a really good decision. It's just shocking how, like you said, the delivery of it can make things that people would typically be like, yes, this is what's best. But if they don't feel like they've been consulted and they don't have a decision, they're just immediately against it. And then they're looking for others to be against it too. And immediately you have a mutiny, which is like totally unnecessary. You call it the change waterfall?
The communication waterfall. I just trademarked it, actually.
Yeah, no, I saw that. That's weird. The website's already been purchased.
Yeah. But like, I think about like when we were doing compensation changes at my last company, right? We would, it would basically be like me and the CEO talking through the comp
your
stuff.
Ivory tower, in your ivory
right, in our ivory tower.
It's like with your
like that's where to start, right? Then we would loop in the other execs to, as soon as we had like a basic framework and where we're thinking, right? Say we had like 20% done, we'd loop in the other execs to get their opinions on it. And once we had the level, like all the levels, kind of, we all basically agreed on the general levels and the quotas and things like that. Then we started looping the managers. And because we don't want the managers to think that they're going to have to assign quotas to their team that they're not going to be able to hit. And so once we had that conversation with the managers, they would give us some feedback, and sometimes we would incorporate that. Sometimes we would push back and have conversations about it. But once we had that conversation, then the managers were bought in. And it's hard to loop in the individual contributors at that point beforehand, because you have to cut it off at somewhere. But that was our version of the waterfall, where we would get the consensus and also try to get everyone's buy-in and input before we released it. So people weren't that surprised, and they were prepared for these compensation conversations that they were going to inevitably have to have.
I love it. Well, we went from strategic thinking to strategic communication. We're going to have to coin the first one, the strategic thinking waterfall, strategic training waterfall. Communication.
Go chase some waterfalls, kid.
Did you hear the heater just went on?
I did.
So
I did. I would
jacket. Finally works.
Give that. Oh, I guess not a 2 thumbs down. That's waterfall. Maybe just a single thumbs down. So our gestures can work here. But
that was a good one, man. It made me smarter.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. I think there are lots of great management micro lessons that people can learn and talk through, and most of it comes down to communications and expectation setting. So I think this was a good short episode today, and we'll see you all soon.